Hey guys, it's Quinlin. So welcome back to my channel, or welcome if you're new. Today I'm really excited. I'm bringing you guys my July wrap up. I read a total of 8 books this month, and if you watched my summer TBR, you'll know that I had a much more ambitious reading month planned, but it is what it is, and I'm definitely bummed. I wanted to read like 10 or 11 books this month, and honestly, I'm especially bummed just because I had one book that I was reading last night, and I honestly had like 150 pages left, and it was like 9:30, and I was like, I can finish it before midnight, and then I just fell asleep. So I'm gonna try to finish it today, obviously, but it is a little bit of a bummer that it's not a higher number, but you know what? I think that's solid. I remember one month I think I read like 6 books, so better than nothing for sure. Anyways, the second thing that I just wanted to really quickly bring up is that I cut my hair, so I'm really pleased with it. I do think it looks a little bit whack today just because I curled my hair yesterday. I'm trying to teach myself how to curl hair, and I know I'm 18. I don't know how to curl hair. I know it's kind of, it's not that hard, but I could be doing it completely wrong, so I just wouldn't say like I'm good at it yet. But basically, it is like a little bit, the curl didn't really like completely fall out, so it's, I don't know, I just don't think she's looking her best today. I just don't like how they kind of, it's just, I don't know, it's not vibing with me today, but I'm just gonna deal with it. The real reason that I wanted to bring up me cutting my hair is because I have to expose myself really quickly. Basically, I film my videos in chunks. So I film usually about 3 or 4 at a time. Like today, I'm going to be filming a couple more videos after this one. And I do try to change up my outfits just to, you know, how I have a little bit of pizzazz. But basically, I have some videos coming, and I do this because it just helps me like have a consistent uploading schedule for me. I just find it really difficult to like film a video every single week. I think it's just a lot easier for me to kind of get them all done at one time, and it also is more of a production for me just because I have to put on a full face of makeup, and I don't usually put on a full face of makeup, which you can definitely tell from my vlogs where I look not my best. But yeah, anyways, basically, I have a couple more videos coming out where I have long hair, and so you guys get to enjoy my long hair for a little bit longer. Basically, I just wanted to give you a heads up because I know it's a little bit weird for me to cut my hair and then have videos where I have long hair, but it is how it is. I think my next video coming is going to be me with short hair, but then after that, it's going to be a couple videos of me with long hair, so just letting you know. Anyways, let's jump into the wrap-up. So the first book I read this month was 100 Years of Solitude by Gabriel Garcia Marquez, and basically this is a classic. It did win the Nobel Prize, so kind of a big deal, and this is about, basically it covers a family through the generations, and originally the family found this small town called Macondo in Colombia, and basically it just follows the family through the generations. There is a bit of magic because this is the guy who invented magical realism. It's kind of crazy. Honestly, just as like kind of a side note, like when you read classics, you get kind of shook because so many of the classic books, like they invented something or they did this for the first time, and you know, you can get really used to a trope, but it's kind of crazy to think that, wow, at one point someone invented like the love triangle or magical realism. Someone invented that. Like that, it just blows my mind. It just follows the family through the generations, basically, and I've got to be honest, I kind of struggled with this book. Have a lot of mixed feelings, and so because of that, I think I would give it a 3-star rating, but I want you to take that with a grain of salt. So first of all, I want to note that I actually recently, the video came out, which is called Reading Classics So You Don't Have to, Part 1. And basically, I go through this and 4 other classic books because I found a list of 100 classics, and my goal is to read them all before I die. And so I'm going to film a video every 5 books and review all of them and kind of try to talk about the major themes, whether or not I think it's important that you read them, and so on and so forth. And so if you want to hear some of like the themes and my in-depth thoughts on the books, you should definitely check that book out. That video out. I'm really proud of it. I put a lot of effort into it just in terms of like reading, and so I'm just really pleased with it. But basically, I will go into this book a little bit on here anyways, and I just wanted to say that I I rated it 3 stars because I felt like there's kind of a lot of things. First of all, I felt like at points I got really confused because a lot of the names are Jose Arcadio, like throughout the generations, or they're like an iteration of that. It's really confusing because a lot of the characters, especially the male characters, have the same names, and so when you repeat that and you have like 5 or 6 characters with the same names, even though they're different generations, it can get very confusing. And there is a family tree at the beginning of the book, but so that was really helpful, but I still got a little confused at times, and I did at points feel like the book felt a little bit directionless, like I wasn't really sure where it was going, just because it was telling the story of the family, and so there are obviously like anecdotes of like what's going on in the family, but I felt like I didn't really know where the story was going. And for me at least, I guess, I don't know if I'm just being dumb, but I really didn't kind of get the themes of the book, and so I ended up having to Google them, and this is partially a critique on the Latin American elite. So once I learned that, I guess I saw more meaning in the book and I kind of understood it a little bit better, but I still didn't like personally bring a lot of meaning to me, and it didn't really make me enjoy the book anymore. I felt like I just in general didn't love this book, and there was a lot of incest, and I think the incest is obviously like meant to represent kind of like the inbreeding of the elite and how like they will go so far to like not associate with the lower classes, that they would rather like be inbred than like basically like reproduce with lower classes because they're so elitist. And so I feel like, yeah, that's really deep, but the incest itself is really gross, and I am just not a fan of incest, so I didn't love that aspect. Basically, I honestly, like, I enjoyed the book, but I kind of, like, looking back on it, like, I'm glad I read it, but I don't think I would reread it. I just feel like while I was actually reading it, I did feel kind of like I was slagging through it, but there were some parts of the book that were genuinely like really funny or just really interesting, and there were some parts of the book where I felt really captivated, but there's other parts where I felt like I was kind of being dragged through it. So mixed feelings, and I give this book a 3-star rating, but again, like I said, like I want you to take that with a grain of salt. It's a classic, and it's obviously a classic for a reason. So this book is very meaningful, and it did a lot for like the literature community, and I do feel like it's really important to kind of expand your horizons. I read a lot, I feel like, of books that take place in like America and Europe, and then like in fantasy worlds, and not a lot of like Latin American authors or books that take place like in Latin America. So I do feel like it's definitely like important to read, and I feel like this is one of those things where I might say like you should read it before you die, but maybe not prioritize it that much, just because I personally didn't find a lot of enjoyment, but that doesn't mean that you won't. And I feel like this is definitely a very individual book, because a lot of the people that I've talked to that read this book actually love it. Like my roommate, she mentioned that it's one of her favorite books. My mom remembers really enjoying it when she read it in college, and so I think maybe it was just me, to be honest, that didn't like it. So I would recommend this book, and when I say 3 stars, I almost feel like I want to put classics as like a separate category. That was my personal enjoyment of the story, but it doesn't mean that it was a bad book. And again, 3 stars is not a bad star rating, but it definitely wasn't bad. So yeah. Yeah, I don't know. I'm struggling with kind of talking about classics, especially when I'm comparing them to like YA and talking about YA in the same book, just because I feel like they're 2 totally different like spheres of reading, and definitely you have to appreciate like the classics, if not just for like pure like enjoyment, like you have to appreciate what they did for like the whole world of literature. And like, okay, so the next book that I read was Ghost of the Shadow Market, and I also gave this one a 3-star rating, but obviously it's not comparable to 100 Years of Solitude. Like, I couldn't say that, oh, these are like on the same tier. You know what I mean? So again, I want you to keep in mind that I feel like classics are kind of get their own category separate from YA, because I just feel like, yeah, that's, yeah. Like I said, the next book I read was this one, and it's by Cassandra Clare, Sarah Reese Brennan, Maureen Johnson, Kelly Link, and Robin Wasserman. And if you don't know what it's about, it is basically a bunch of short stories that follow silent brother Zachariah as he goes through the shadow market, kind of in search of a person. And in each individual short story, it kind of details a character from the shadow hunter world, and it kind of follows them. For example, we follow Tessa, we follow Tessa's kids, we follow kind of more of the modern, like, dark artifices and stuff like that, those characters. So definitely, like, a fun way to kind of experience all the shadow, like, hunter world, because the first story takes place in 1901, and then, like, the last one takes place in something like 2012 or 2011 or something like that. So it definitely goes over a long period of time. Personally, I didn't love this story. I felt like individual short stories were like 4 stars and individual short stories were like 2 stars. And because like there were some that I honestly really enjoyed and I flew through, and then there were some that just took me like a long time to kind of get through, and I felt like these are boring, like I'm not interested in them. And I guess it definitely depends, because I definitely have my favorites in terms of characters. Like I really loved the Tessa stories because I love Tessa, and I didn't care so much about some of the other characters and their stories. But I do think it is helpful because a lot of these stories give you insight on like some of the background of some of the characters that you wouldn't otherwise know. And so I felt like I'm glad I read this, and I do kind of wish I read it before Chain of Gold. But at the same time, like, I'm just glad I kind of got around to it. I do feel like my main criticism of the book is that I feel like it's really long for one. So while it's supposed to be like short stories, it is like 600 pages, and that is like basically a normal Cassandra Clare book length, I would say. I mean, yeah, like lately her books have been pretty long. And so, but I felt like you could tell that other authors had like a hand in it, where like I honestly love a lot of her other books. Like I love Chain of Gold so much. I felt like this I didn't love, and I feel like part of it was maybe just the style. Like I'm not that into short stories. Like some of the stories I would rather read about like individual characters over a longer period of time than like broken up into short stories. And then also I just felt like you could really honestly tell that other authors had a hand in it, and I just much prefer Cassandra Clare's writing on her own rather than like multiple. I just felt like sometimes the writing styles kind of clashed, and it's not like the transitions between writing styles are pretty seamless. Like you can't tell like, oh, this is Cassandra Clare writing and this is like Sarah Reese Brennan, but definitely like you can tell sometimes that like the sense of humor or whatever is just like a little bit off, a little bit different, and I just like didn't vibe with it all that much. So the next book I read this month was In Cold Blood by Truman Capote, and again, this was for my classics video, so definitely check it out if you're interested. But basically this is the invention of true crime. Again, kind of wild that people just invent genres, and that's what you get when you read classics. You can read sometimes like the beginning of a genre. And so I really enjoyed this book. I would probably give it like 4 stars. I thought it was really good. I think the biggest thing is that it is kind of real. It is true crime, and he did a lot of research going into this book, and you can tell that there's a lot of thought going into it, and there are definitely some like direct quotes pulled from, I guess, like letters and like transcripts and stuff like that, like interviews and whatnot that he actually used in like this book. And so it does make it even more real. I did think it was a little bit scary. So basically it is about the murder of the Clutter family. The murders of the Clutter family. There were 4 of them living in the house at this time, and there were 2 guys who came and basically shot all of them in the middle of the night. And it basically follows basically the beginning up to the murder, and then afterwards kind of what the perpetrators did and how they got caught. So it is real story. Again, if you Google it, you'll basically find out a lot of the details, but I felt like this was a really detailed and interesting way to kind of look into it. I had a lot of, not exactly fun reading it because it was a little bit sad and a little bit scary at times. I was a little bit on the edge of my seat, like kind of worried that someone was gonna break into my house and kill me and my family. But other than that, I definitely think if you're a fan of true crime, or like especially of like BuzzFeed Unsolved and stuff like that, I feel like you should definitely check this out. It is super, I don't know, I just thought it was super interesting, and it very much absorbed me in the world, and it was a pretty quick read for me, so yeah, I'm a big fan. The next book I read was actually A Loan from a Friend, and it was A Luminous Republic by Andres Barba, and basically it takes place in this like small town, and there are these like 32 children who kind of appear out of nowhere from the jungle, and they start wreaking havoc on the town. And it follows this guy who's like kind of like a social worker, and he's kind of blamed for part of it, and it's just like the story of the kids and how they infiltrated the town. And okay, I'll be honest, at first, I didn't like it. I just thought it was kind of weird. It was really short, by the way. If I had it, it's like really skinny and short, so I can't show it to you because I gave it back to her, but it's like definitely like a really quick read. But at first, I just wasn't into it. I wasn't sucked into the world, but the ending left me with like a lot of kind of wonder and questions, and I don't know, it just kind of left me thinking. And she and I kind of both thought, well, she definitely said it's kind of like a modern classic, so it's obviously not like a classic because it wasn't written like a long time ago. But yeah, I would definitely have to agree with her, because it does read very much like kind of a classic, and I should know, I've been reading a lot of classics lately. It just gives off the vibe of kind of like a classic book, but it's obviously written in a more modern way, and it's just really interesting. There are some things that like he very like obviously kind of states about like the world, but there are just some like more interesting things, and it kind of reminded me of Coraline in a way, if you've ever watched the movie. I actually haven't watched the movie, but what I've heard about Coraline is that like children kind of watch it with like a sense of like wonderment and awe, and adults are like horrified by the movie. And I feel like that is kind of the vibe of A Luminous Republic. I feel like if you were a child and you read it, you would be kind of like hyped, because it's about all these like wild children who basically don't have any authority and they can just do whatever they want. Whereas if you read it as an adult, you would feel like, oh, it's very like chaotic and kind of scary to have all these like children with like no authority figure kind of on the loose doing crazy things. And they do some like really horrible things, so it's very scary. And I felt like it's also a unique experience for me, because I'm kind of reading it still as like a teenager, and like very much like remembering my childhood, and like having the perception of like knowing that like as a kid, if I had read it, like I would be kind of filled with awe and like be like, wow, like that's so cool, like that's the dream. And then also being kind of on the cusp of adulthood and feeling like, whoa, this is kind of scary. I thought that was like a really unique experience that the book kind of gave me. So I don't know what star rating I would give it. It's kind of hard to like quantify in terms of stars. Maybe like 3.5, or because it definitely ended on like a really interesting note, and I felt like especially like the ending was just really like gripping, but I did feel like the beginning of the book I wasn't as interested in it. So I don't know, but I feel like it would just be something interesting you guys should check out. Again, just because it's so short, I feel like it's just a quick read and it won't take up that much of your time, but it's just so interesting, and I definitely like to talk about it with somebody if anybody has ever read it. So yeah. Okay, so then the next 4 books, for me, I feel like it's been a long time coming for me to reread these, and it is the A Court of Thorns and Roses series by Sarah J. Maas. So I'll talk about each book just pretty briefly. I am going to film a review on this series, I think, that I'll post in a little bit, which I'm really excited about. But basically, Siri picked this out for me, and I was really excited because I've been wanting to reread these books for a long time, and they're definitely the shorter of the 2 Sarah J. Maas series. I guess now she has 3, but it's shorter than Throne of Glass, so it's a lot easier to read, and I've been missing Sarah J. Maas and missing the world ever since I read House of Earth and Blood, and I just really enjoyed it. I honestly thought that, I don't know, I feel like it was long enough ago that I read this book that I was really able to like fully immerse myself in the world, and I didn't remember everything that happened. And I mean, I basically remembered all the major plot points, but I definitely had a lot of fun. I am hesitant to like give this like a star rating, because I think for A Court of Thorns and Roses, I would give it 4 stars. And I'll tell you that the first time I ever read this book, I was not a huge fan of Tamlin. This time reading it, I was like very neutral on Tamlin. Like I was like, you know, like, okay. And if you've read the rest of the series, there's definitely, I'm gonna make a spoiler-filled review, so don't worry, I'm gonna talk about everything that happens. But If you read this rest of the series, like, you know. But basically, I was just kind of like neutral on him. I just never like loved Tamlin as like a love interest, and in the beginning the first time I read it, I also hated her sisters. This time around I actually kind of enjoyed her sisters until the last book. I really didn't like Nesta, sorry, not Nessa. And yeah, that's kind of it. I can't really talk too much without giving spoilers, so definitely stay tuned for my review coming up. So then, of course, the next book I read was A Court of Mist and Fury by Sarah J Maas, and this book is pure gold. It is absolutely amazing. I would highly recommend, I mean, you can't obviously read this book without reading the first book in the series. I would highly recommend this series for anybody, but especially people that are interested in hate to love, and especially people who are interested in just fantasy in general. This book is an absolute masterpiece. I am in love with this book. It is just, like, this is peak, and it's just so good. So yes, I would highly recommend. Okay, and then of course the next book is A Court of Wings and Ruin by Sarah J Maas, and I have to admit, this is only the second time I've read this particular book, and I was actually kind of shook because I forgot a lot of the things that happened. I remembered kind of the ending and some of like the major plot points, but I forgot a lot of the individual details of what happened. So it was actually really fun to read because I wasn't expecting a lot of the things that happened, because I honestly just forgot a lot. So I am looking forward to reading it a third time eventually down the road, and we'll just see. I'll probably read it again before I read the Nessian book, which is coming out in 2021, which I'm really excited for. But yeah, this was totally a fun book. Not as good as A Court of Mist and Fury, because this was more focused on like war, obviously, and kind of the battle, and like strategy and stuff like that, whereas I felt like A Court of Mist and Fury was a lot more like character development, and I thought that was really central to like the book, and it was just really important. So I would say maybe this is like 4 stars or like 4.5 stars, but like A Court of Mist and Fury was like absolutely 5 stars. Like, it was perfect. Like, no one can ever know. It was beautiful. And then finally, the last book I read this month was A Court of Frost and Starlight by Sarah J Maas. And this is kind of like a short story. It's like 200 pages, so it's like a short novel for Sarah J Maas. It basically just details kind of the aftermath of... I never even summarized A Court of Thorns and Roses. Okay, The Court of Thorns and Roses, if you don't know what it's about, it's basically about this huntress, Farah, and she lives with her family in this really small, like, poor, well, it's not a poor town, but she's really poor, and they lost all their wealth, and so she hunts in the forest to, like, feed the family. And one day she shoots a wolf, and then this big monster dude comes in, and he's like, bro, that was my friend, like... that's not good. So he basically kidnaps her and takes her to the fairyland, which is above the wall. They have like this wall separating, like, the human lands are south and the fairylands are north, and he takes her north of the wall, and she's supposed to like live out the remainder of her days, but there's like a mysterious blight upon the land, and she kind of has to figure it out. It's kind of loosely like a Beauty and the Beast retelling, just kind of how like Throne of Glass is like loosely a Cinderella retelling. So then this book is like kind of the aftermath of like the war. I'll probably give it like 4 stars again. Like, it's not like an amazing book because obviously it's not even really like a real book, so it doesn't even really have like an overarching plot. It's just kind of like a setup for the next book in this series. But just because I love the characters so much, and I could honestly read a book about them doing like really menial things, I'm absolutely in love with all the characters in this series, so I still loved it, and I'm a fool for Sarah J Maas. Okay, so that brings me to the end of my July wrap-up. Thank you guys so much for sticking around, and I hope you honestly pick up some of the classics that I read, including A Luminous Republic and In Cold Blood or 100 Years of Solitude. Honestly, would highly recommend. And if you haven't read ACOTAR, definitely read it. I am a fool for Sarah J Maas, like I said earlier. I love her books. I don't know, I think a big reason I fell in love with them is like the way she portrays like mental health struggles, because I felt like I could really connect on that level. But then her like character development and then the romance, everything about her series is just like amazing. So I'm really pleased, and I am going to, well, as you guys know, I have a couple more videos to film, but after that I am going to get to work on this August TBR because I have a ton of books to read. So yeah, there's that. Anyways, thank you guys so much for coming along with me, and yeah,